Yes, yes, I see all. I see all you naughty boos and ghouls out there in YouTube land, and I see why you've come. I see you all are looking for something very special. I see you're looking for a review on the first episode of season 2 of that crawly tainted Crypt. Am I right, boos and ghouls? Of course I'm right. I am Madam. I am Madam Bushla. Yes, that's it. I am Madam Bushla, and I see all. It isn't Jen's reviews from the grave tonight. It's Madam Bushla with her big bushy ball. You get the double innuendo, right, guys? Well, if you're here for double innuendos and tells from the crypt talk till morning, you're in the right pace. The fee is $20. You pay in advance. And if you want to hear my thoughts, my frightfully fortune teller's thoughts on the first episode of season 2 called Dead Right, well then, stick around, all you fortune seekers. Okay, I promise I'm stopping. But I wanted to have a little fun with this review, and so I thought, I haven't gone campy in a couple of episodes, so why the fuck not? So, we are here on the first episode of season 2, which is aptly named Dead Right. And the reason I say it's aptly named is because, as you can probably guess, is 1, you guys have probably seen the episode, and 2, even if you can't, it involves a tale of a fortune teller, and Deneen Moore and Jeffrey Tambor. And when you're talking about the episode of Dead Right and Tales from the Crypt in general, chances are this episode is going to get mentioned a lot for a lot of people. I hear it constantly being in a lot of people's top 10 list. It's in my personal favorite top 5 Tales from the Crypt episodes. I think it's just one of those bright, shining lights. And yes, it's a little cliche because it seems like this is on everybody's list, but I think it's just because it's that good. It's not so much cliche, it's just that good. And what makes this episode so special is the powerhouse dynamic performances given by the brilliant Deneen Moore and the equally brilliant Jeffrey Tambor. These are two people that you can just tell watching this episode, they're having a lot of fun. They're playing around, they're letting loose and having a really good time. And it's funny, they're playing a couple that has absolutely no chemistry, but they have so much chemistry on screen. The story is nothing new under the sun, but I don't think even back in the 90s, that's why we came to Tales from the Crypt. We came to have a good bloody time with a lot of dark humor and seeing people get their just desserts. And this episode definitely delivers on the just desserts part in more ways than one. But as I was saying, for me, why I love this episode so much is just getting to watch these two fucking wonderful performers getting to play these parts. Deneen Moore is someone us horror fans sure have learned to appreciate the last couple of years, given her dynamite performance in The Substance. But the thing about Deneen Moore, at least for me, she's never a go-to actress for me until I start going down her filmography, and I always start remembering just how many wonderful films she has been in. She's been in one of her earlier pictures that a lot of people have slept on. It's not a horror film, but it's a thriller called The Seventh Sign, and if you guys have never seen that, I strongly recommend you guys to check that out. She was also in Ghost, which back in the 90s, if you weren't there, kids, was a movie that just took the 90s by storm. It's very quotable. Everybody knows that pottery scene, and I'd like to be this really cool, alternative, go against the grain cinephile that goes, ain't too cool for Ghost. It's just not my thing. But no, honestly, I cry like a little bitch and absolutely love Ghost. You have Patrick Swayze, Deneen Moore, and Whoopi Goldberg, and that pottery scene is just a great scene. But the scene that always really stays with me is Patrick Swayze's monologue. Every time he gives that ending monologue about life and love, I'm crying like a little baby bitch. She was also in another film of mine, a comedy film called Nothing But Trouble, and she managed to have pretty good chemistry with Chevy Chase, which is a feat within itself if even half of the stuff that they say about Chevy Chase is true. She was in Disclosure, which was another big movie back in the 90s that had a lot of people. There was a water cooler movie where everybody was talking. Not to mention another film called Indecent Proposal, which was another movie that was very much of a water cooler movie. She was also in The Butcher's Wife, and she was in a family film called Now and Then that a lot of the kids from my generation remember quite fondly. What I'm basically saying is she's a very versatile actress, but when she doesn't do a ton of horror, but when she does horror, like in The Substance or this episode of Tales from the Crypt, she does it phenomenally. And even though there's so many roles of hers for me to pick from her, she was also really good in The Scarlet Letter. I think my favorite film role, or my favorite role of hers, is this Tales from the Crypt episode. And she just plays such a little gold digger, and she doesn't even bother to hide it. I think that's what I like about her character as Kathy. She's like, yeah, I'm just interested in your money. If you can buy me, you can have me, guy. And I respect it. She's a gold digger, but she's honest. And she's working her way till she finds Mr. Right or Mr. Rich. But not to be outdone, she has a wonderful partner in that of Jeffrey Tambor. And Jeffrey Tambor, it's a little dicey right here because there was some allegations of sexual misconduct on his part. Now, I don't know how true those allegations are, but I do want to throw that out there. He is a phenomenal actor. You got to give the devil his due, and he's a hard-working character actor. His list of movies is quite long, and he's also been in a couple of hit TV shows. He was working on HBO around the same time Tales from the Crypt was, because he was in a little show called The Larry Sanders Show, which was also filming around the same time Tales from the Crypt was. And even I didn't watch it at the time when it was playing in the 90s, but when I got into my 20s, I found the whole series at a thrift store once, and I only checked it out because I'm a big Tom Petty fan, and him and Gary Shandling were really good friends, and I'd heard he'd popped up in a couple of episodes, and I basically am such a Petty nerd that I wanted to see those episodes, if for nothing else, and I ended up really loving the show. And one of the aspects I loved about the Larry Sanders Show was Jeffrey Tambor's Hey Now, Hank Kingsley. And there does seem to be a little bit of a common theme, because my favorite movie that Jeffrey Tambor ever did was a movie from the late 90s that a lot of people slept on with Michael Madison called A House in the Hills. And he plays both Hank Kingsley and his character in House in the Hills. He kind of plays... they're not the most likable of characters, but he makes them, if they're not, he doesn't make them likable, but he makes them so much fun to watch. And he does the same with this character in Dead Right. He really knows how to make unusual characters super interesting, and it might be characters you might not like, but you don't want to turn away from the screen. And he just is. And then there's also another really big strong praise of this episode is the makeups, especially for the early 90s, was pretty good. The costuming and makeup department, because Jeffrey Tambor has to play an extremely heavyset person, like I'm talking about 300 or 400 pounds, and they pad him right, they do all kinds of makeup, and Jeffrey Tambor also does all this really heavy grunting and breathing, like it's hard for him to breathe, as it would be if you had 400 or 500 pounds around your vital organs. I would think it would be hard to breathe. It's not his less than desirable physical appearance that makes him memorable and stand out. It's very good effects, especially for the 90s, but it's the personality he gives this character. This is a character, Jeffrey Tambor's character is just a fat, disgusting pig. And again, it's not because he's heavyset, he's just an obnoxious jerk. And I think this is where the episode is super relatable, because I think there's a lot of us that have been in a relationship relationship, probably more than one, where we're just absolutely miserable. We're in the relationship for the wrong reasons. And I'm not even talking about financial reasons, but sometimes you find yourself in relationships and you realize, oh shit, I gotta get out of this. How the fuck do I get out of this? And you're just miserable, and the person that you're with is just an obnoxious asshole. And Jeffrey Tambor plays this type of character to fucking perfection. He's like about 400 pounds, and he walks around with a swagger. He's a little jiggly too, but it's this obnoxious swagger that, you know, says I'm the shit, guys. And he cast his eye on Deneen Moore, and the vibe you get from him is like, even though he looks how he looks, like he thinks Deneen Moore is like the luckiest girl in the world, that he deemed her worthy enough to be after, instead of the other way around. And again, it's not because he's a heavyset. Like, it's good to have confidence, but this isn't confidence. This is just fucking denial and arrogance, like thinking you're something you're really not. And he wears these cheap, tacky suits, and he just has a very abrupt, abrasive manner. No class, no breeding, and he reminds me, now the person I was with was not morbidly obese, but when I was watching this episode, somebody I dated before Marty, I'm like, oh my god, minus the weight, this guy's exactly like the guy I dated, just this obnoxious piece of shit. And it was funny. But this episode, but Jeffrey Tambor and Deneen Moore just give such a wonderful performances. And so what the hell is Dead Right all about? Well, Dead Right is about a fortune teller, and it's about a girl named Kathy, played by Deneen Moore, and she's a working girl, and as the fortune teller tells her, she's wasting her life away. Every day, type, and she's waiting for Mr. Right to come along, or in Kathy's case, Mr. Rich. And how we set this whole thing up is Deneen Moore goes on to her lunch hour to this fortune teller, and because she's heard that she's the best and that Madame Vornat is always right and always knows your fortune. She's the real deal. And $20 you pay in advance. And basically how this fortune teller does it is she drinks up Deneen Moore's essence. She fills up on her essence and gets a sense of who Deneen Moore is. And she basically says that to the day she goes and sees the fortune teller, she's going to lose her job, but by the end of the day, she's going to have a new one. She's going to meet, and at the new job, she's going to meet the man that she's going to marry. And also that the man she's going to marry is going to die violently and leave Kathy a rich widow. Deneen Moore doesn't buy a word of this. Deneen Moore, again, she's playing a working girl, and she's a tough, streetwise girl, and she thinks this whole thing is a big crock. And she pays her $20 and says thanks for nothing. And she heads back to her office, and she tells her friend, who her friend is played by the great Kate Hodge. And while Kate Hodge hasn't done a ton of horror, she's actually gotten to play a final girl in one of my favorite Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, which is Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. I've always gotten a lot of judgment when I say it's one of my favorite Texas Chainsaw movies. I'm not saying it's better than the original one. I'm just saying, for me personally, it's my favorite. And Kate Hodge is one of my favorite final girls in that movie. The line she gives about, you dumb bitch, you probably don't even know how to work that thing. And she goes, pretty goddamn good, you backwoods motherfucker. I've always wanted to say that to somebody. Everyone always looks at me when they ask, who's one of your favorite final girls, Jen? Kate Hodge from Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 3. She has a small role in this, and she plays a secretarial friend of Kathy's who had turned her on to Madame Vorna. Deneen Moore, who thinks it's just her and her Kate Hodge in the building, says, oh, Madame Vorna was a waste of time. She said I was going to lose my job today, and I told her that asshole wasn't even in town. And of course, cue in her boss's voice going, actually, Miss Finch, that asshole came back early. early. And I love the look. Again, give it to Deneen Moore. Like, she has her back to him, and the blood just drains from her face, and her eyes get big, and she turns around and she goes, "I'm so sorry, mister." And her boss goes, "Oh, I'm not a thin-skinned boss to get pissed off for being called a name. However, you are 30 minutes late from returning to your lunch hour. Pack up and get out now." And so, just like the fortune teller said, she's lost a job. Another thing I love about this episode is it really gives you the feeling that the hands of fate are on Kathy, because if she hadn't got fired exactly when she did, she's walking down the street and she walks past this little kind of strip joy titty bar, and you can see the owner is throwing out a waitress, and she's like, "You didn't fire me, I quit, and you'll never be able to replace me." And the owner goes, "Yeah, we'll never survive. How are we ever going to replace you?" And his eyes cast on Deneen Moore, and he goes, "Hey, you want a job?" And she gets a job. And again, just the way that scene is shot, it just feels like the whole hands of fate are on Kathy. And against Kathy's better judgment, she goes back to the fortune teller, says, "You know, you got me fired. It wasn't because you were right. It was just your stupid clock." And Madame Vorna counters, "But you got a new job and everything." So Deneen Moore starts working at this new strip club, and sure enough, enter Jeffrey Tambor, who comes in. And again, he's like 400 pounds, and he just waddles in, and it's a great shot of him waddling in. And I already said the padding and the makeup for the time look really good and hold up to this day. And Deneen Moore, when she first sees him, is just completely disgusted and says that the guy needs a whole new zip code, which, fun fact, kids, at the time that this would have actually been set at, wouldn't have had zip codes at that particular time. I read a fun little piece of trivia, and I thought I'd throw it in for you guys. But it's just a little nitpick. It's kind of funny. Deneen Moore gets him a drink, and Jeffrey Tambor is just sleazy and greasy and ugh. And it's not because he's heavy-set, he's ugh. He just has a vibe that's just really repulses you from the get-go. And he goes, "How about a date?" And he's like, "Do you feel it?" He says, again, we're leaning very much on to this cosmic thing on Kathy, and this is her fate. And she goes, "Well, no problem on the drink, but not the date." She's very rude to him, and Jeffrey Tambor and her go back and forth. And she's horrified. And so as soon as her shift's over, she runs back to Madame Vorna, and she's like, "You gotta tell me, who's the real guy?" And she's like, "That is the real guy." And like, Kathy just wants to kill herself, because she's like, "He's a disgusting pig. I couldn't go through with this." And she resists for a while, and you see some interactions between her and Jeffrey Tambor, and he's like, "I know I'm a little overweight." And again, it's cruel. I would never do this to somebody, but the way Kathy handles him, like just voyeuristic movie way, it's such a fun scene to watch, because she's like a little overweight, and the Pope is just a little bit Catholic, and Hitler was just a little anti-Semitic. I mean, it's mean and cruel, and I'd never tell someone, even if I didn't like them, that. But by living through vicariously through these episodes, it's fun to think an alternate personality to just, it's so cool. And she has a cigarette in her hand, and again, there's just something about Deneen Moore. She's kind of mean, but she also kind of has a point. And Jeffrey Tambor just keeps hounding her. And again, I think that's very relatable, that some guys just won't take the hint. And sometimes that can be romantic, depending on the right guy. You know, persistence can be sometimes romantic, but a lot of times, even if the guy's a really good-looking guy, it can be a big red flag if you keep telling them no and they just keep coming at you until you wear them down. Sometimes at the end of those stories, you can get a real sweet romantic story, but sometimes, guys, it could end on an episode of, like, you know, one of those murder shows. That's all I'm saying. But Jeffrey Tambor finally wears her down to get a date. And again, what I love about this is they go out to eat, and Jeffrey Tambor, they're at a Chinese restaurant, and he's like, I love Chinese food except for one thing. And very dryly, again, Deneen Moore plays this with such craft and such brilliance. She goes, you want to eat 20 minutes later? And he laughs, and food is flying out of his mouth, and he hits the table, and he's loud. I mean, he's just rude and ill-bred in every part of his personality. And he's like, how did you know? And it's just, and you just cringe. You, both the audience and Deneen Moore's just like, ew. They have dinner, and then they go dancing, and you get this montage of Jeffrey Tambor and Deneen Moore dancing, and you hear the song, Heaven, I'm in heaven, and he steps on her feet a few times, and again, instead of apologizing like any dude would do, he goes, actually, I'm really light on my feet. And you can hear Kathy muttering, I wish you were light on my feet. What? You're such a delight to meet. It's just really cute how they play back and forth. But probably my favorite / most horrifying part of this episode is when he takes her home and the obligatory kiss goodnight. And you can tell Kathy just doesn't really want to kiss him. And again, very pushy, very overbearing, which is a characteristic I hate in guys. And again, the one guy that I dated long before Marty was very overbearing and pushy, and it drove me fucking mad. I held my tongue a lot, but inside my head I was screaming, you fucking obnoxious jerk. But that's neither here nor there. But you can just tell that that Kathy does not want to touch Jeffrey Tambor at all. But he leans in for a kiss, and so she allows the kiss. And you think, oh, maybe it's kind of sweet, right? And then you see Jeffrey Tambor go off, and you get a shot of Kathy at her kitchen window, and she's bent over and she's barfing because, and you allude to, Kathy says, oh God, in his breath. And just the way she acts, you can almost smell the noxious fumes coming off this guy. It's probably the most iconic scene in this episode is where she pukes in that sink. I've heard so many people talk about that thing. It's always with puke. Like this scene in Audition, it just gets to us for some reason. We also get another really great shot of the Cocteau. They go out to the movies, and again, you see him just barely being able to fit in this little narrow movie theater seat, and he has these two ginormous buckets of popcorn, and he has his arm around her, and it's just kind of disgusting. And what's playing at the theater? Cocteau's version of Beauty and the Beast. And you see the transformation of both Beauty, and then you see the Beast, and then you look back at Deneen Moore and Jeffrey Tambor. It's a very quick little nod, but I really appreciate it. The director of this episode, this is his second episode he's directed. It is Leah Thompson's husband, Howard DeLucia. I'm totally probably mispronouncing his name, but he also directed the episode Only Sin Deep, and he isn't known too much for horror. He usually more does coming of age stories or comedies. I guess his best two known works would probably be Pretty in Pink and The Great Outdoors. But he did, both of his Tales from the Crypt episodes are awesome. The first one he did was with his wife Leah Thompson, but this is definitely my favorite episode he directed. And there's a lot of cool little touches that he adds into this episode that I was really appreciative of, like showing the Cocteau version of Beauty and the Beast. I thought that was a really cool touch. And also her throwing up in the sink. And we've all been there, right? Like, we'll think of, at least us ladies, I'm sure some men, like some of the guys we've dated, like after we got out of it, you just want to go to a sink and throw up and think, ew. Well, maybe not all of us, but I've got a few that I'm like, no. And he eventually pops the question, and Deneen Moore goes, well, I don't know anything about you. And he goes, you know I love you. And again, one of the things about this episode is you can see that it doesn't take much for Jeffrey Tambor to have a really bad temper, and he can go from Mr. Nice Guy to a fucking asshole in like 2.3 seconds, which again, I hate to keep beating this dead horse, really reminds me of an ex of mine, just someone that could have a hair trigger temper kind of thing. But you can see he's getting very angry, and he just asked her to propose, and Deneen Moore goes, well, I don't know anything about you, Charlie. You know I love you. And she's like, yeah, but your family, your background. I mean, if something were to happen, do you have any relatives, like an uncle or a brother or an aunt who has any money and could help us out? And he's like, well, I got an uncle who's loaded. I mean, really loaded. But I ain't asking him for nothing. And as soon as she knows that he has a rich relative, that's when she says her I do's. And again, another thing that really shines, like with a lot of Tales from the Crypt episodes, is there's a lot of dark humor. And particularly with Jeffrey Tambor and Deneen Moore, this really shows. And poor Kathy, before she can get to the money, because you gotta remember, Madame Vorna said that if she marries this guy, he's gonna die violently, and she's gonna inherit a great deal of money. But before she can get to the money, she has to go to the honeymoon, and she has to have sex with him on their wedding night. And he says, Kathy, come on, baby, I might have to start. And then she says, why don't you start without me? Which, if your wife of not even 24 hours tells you to, you know, as you're consummating your marriage, to start without her, it's not a good sign. Like, your wife might be one of the funniest women in the world, but if she's telling you that on your wedding night, it ain't good news, guys. It's not good news. And she has to lay there. And again, you see him in his robe, and he's got bad teeth and kind of stained and just ugh. And you can imagine again the breath, and he's like kissing her body and stuff. And you can just see Deneen Moore just, you know, like trying to get it over with, and just get it over with as quickly as possible. And you get a montage of the two of them going through married life. And again, another scene, and he's not abusive, but he's a bastard. He's laying on the couch eating a big old sandwich, and she's vacuuming their living room, and he snaps his fingers, which I just, ugh. And he goes, and she turns off the vacuum, and he goes, you missed a spot, because his mouth is so full with food. And he points and goes, you missed a spot. And I just thought, you fucking piece of shit. Jeffrey Tambor, you really hate the guy by the end of this episode. And again, it's not because he's heavy. Brendan Fraser had me bawling in The Whale. Nothing against heavyset people, but I do have something against obnoxious jerks that think they're way too impressed with themselves. And that's what we got here. Like, dude, you've got fucking Deneen Moore. Even if you were with a chiseled six-pack, you'd still be on your goddamn knees. Show some goddamn respect, bro. It goes on like that, and Kathy is just, there's a great scene where she's, you know, going through the drudgery of housework and living with someone she can't fucking stand, and she takes she's doing his laundry, she takes a big old drink of booze just to get her day, and she goes out to do some shopping, and she puts some change in a machine. She's going to be getting like a sandwich or a soda pop, and all of a sudden someone yells out, wait a minute, miss, wait a minute. And then she realizes that she is the 1 millionth customer, and they're writing her a check for $1 million. And this is the part of the episode when I was a kid. This was an episode that I thought a lot about. And it's a great episode, and I know if she didn't do this one choice, we wouldn't have had the ending we would have had. But even as a little kid, I always wondered, after she gets the check, because someone asked her, hey, Kathy, what are you going to tell your husband about this cool million? And again, this is why this episode works so much. You just see this big old smile on Deneen Moore's face, and she's like, I can't wait to get home and tell him all about it. Because you know, as soon as she gets home, she's going to tell this loser to fuck off. The money's good, but it's almost not as good as going to tell this fucking loser to hit the bricks. And so she walks in the door, but my question is, why did she even go home? And I know it's to get to A to B for plot points, but as a kid I always thought, you didn't need to. You had all the money. You could just get a whole new wardrobe. So why did you? But of course, it wasn't about, I can answer my own stupid question. It wasn't about getting her clothes. Not really. She just wanted to rub it in that son of a bitch's face and tell him to fuck off. And I get that. You really do feel the need for that. And that's exactly what she does. She comes in dressed to the nines. Her handbag is stuffed with money. And she's like, Madame Vorna was wrong. I I got the money and you didn't. And you can just hear the glee in Deneen Moore's voice as she informs him of that. And Jeffrey Tambor's in the kitchen and he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, I'm talking about you, you creep. And you can just feel all this pent up rage that she's had for all these months living with this asshole is just finally coming out. He's like, but we love each other. And she's like, I never loved you. And he goes, but don't you feel this? And she goes, no, I never did. And again, what this episode taught me as a kid is maybe don't do this. No matter how cathartic you think it would be to tell an ex off, maybe because you just never know what's in a person's head or heart. Because if Kathy hadn't come back, the next set of circumstances wouldn't have transpired had she just, never come back and sent him a Dear John letter. Dear John letters, I think, are the key to this episode. But she comes back, tells him off, and she's walking out the door, and Jeffrey Tambor says that, she tells him that, no more having to smell that sewer you call a body. And she goes, and here's some advice, eat a salad once in a while. And Jeffrey Tambor has a big knife in his hand, and he's chopping stuff, and he goes, hey, Kathy, just one thing before you go. And he's a really big guy, right? And he just stops over from the kitchen to where she's at, and he goes, if I can't have you, no one can have you. And give it to Jeffrey Tambor, because he's mostly just been an obnoxious jerk up to this point. He's actually very sinister when he walks across the room and takes Deneen Moore and grabs her by the shoulders and starts yelling at her that if he can't have her, nobody can. And you can see the panic. Again, it just shows what great actors these guys both are. And you can see that the blood drains from her face, and she goes, Charlie, put the knife down. We can talk about this. Charlie, put the knife down. And you can hear the panic in her voice. And Jeffrey Tambor kind of looks more normal, and he goes, okay, and he puts the knife down, and you think everything's okay for a second, but this is Tales from the Crypt. And then all of a sudden he brings up the knife and just, it's pretty brutal, and it very much reminds you of Psycho. If I can't have you, nobody can. If I can't, and then his pitch goes really higher, and he sounds like this spoiled brat of a little kid just crying and tearing up a toy because he's mad. That's kind of what he looks at Kathy like, and he just keeps sinking in her flesh, the knife, over and over again, and it's very bloody and very gory. And how we end this episode is that Jeffrey Tambor is gonna get the death penalty for it. But before he did, he was the one that got the money. How he got the money was he inherited the money from Kathy, where Kathy thought he was going to inherit the money from him. Vorna didn't exactly explain that part. This is just a really fun episode, and they close off by, him executing, and the newscaster saying that it was the biggest meal, the last meal a condemned man had ever eaten in that state. And it ends there, and then somebody else comes to the fortunate Madame Vorna and says, I hear you can predict the future. And she goes, she heard correctly. And she goes, the fee is $20. You pay in advance. And we end the episode from there. And like I said, kids, this is just such a fun episode from beginning to end. There's a lot of great dark comedy in this, but the last scenes with Deneen Moore and Jeffrey Tambor are really good acting. I mean, they're master classes in acting, because you see, they're not just being funny. You can see that Deneen Moore is generally scared when she sees him with this big hulking monster that's grabbing her with a big knife in her hand. She's really scared, and you can hear the inflections in her voice, and you can see that Jeffrey Tambor isn't all there, and he has this big knife, and it's very creepy how he softly says, okay, and then you think everything's going to be all right, and then he starts screaming again like a spoiled child who's going to break a toy because he's mad. It works on so many levels, and like I said, there's a reason why this episode comes up on so many top 5, top 10 of Tales from the Crypt episodes. The performances are powerhouses, the direction is tight and stellar, and the makeup, especially for the time, the makeup effects are really, really good. And you got to remember, guys, this was a very low low budget show. This is one of my A+ episodes. No notes. I don't have one complaint about this. This is fun. And again, the takeaway, if you're going to take anything away from this particular lesson, kids, it's that send them a Dear John letter. If you have something to tell off an ex with, even if you think they're not going to brutally butcher you in your kitchen, just if you're going to leave them, especially if there's money involved, just send them a Dear John letter. You can call him a son of a bitch. It's just as easy to write, "You son of a bitch, burn in hell, stay away from me," as it is to say it to him. Granted, it might not be as satisfying, but at least but it's also satisfying not to have a butcher knife protruding through your abdomen 6 or 7 times. Like I said, A+, no notes. If you've never seen Dead Right, definitely check it out. It's one of my favorites. It's in my top 5, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that. As always, Boos and Ghouls, I hope you've enjoyed this my rambly bullshit. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please join me next week, because in the director's chair next week is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yes, you heard me right, and I know most horror fans already know this, but in case you didn't, old Arnold, Mr. Terminator himself, is quite a huge horror fan, so it makes more sense than you might think. And let's see what he does with a little episode called The Switch. Please tune in next week to hear my thoughts on that. In the meantime, I'm going to say what I always say. I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. And remember to always keep watching and talking horror. I'll be back with another review very soon. And until then, I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.